They called us monsters, savage, primitive. The galactic community watched our species with barely concealed disgust as we clawed our way up from our mud ball of a planet, trailing violence and chaos in our wake. When humanity finally reached the stars, the enlightened civilizations of the galaxy recoiled in horror at our methods, our emotions, our seemingly endless capacity for destruction. The Zephyrians with their crystalline wisdom, the Maltari with their peaceful telepathic unity, the ancient Kethvar who had transcended physical conflict millennia ago. All of them looked down upon humanity as a blight upon the cosmos, a species too dangerous, too unpredictable, too angry to ever truly belong among the civilized races. They quarantined our systems. They refused our trade. They whispered warnings about the enraged ones to any species that would listen. Humanity became the galaxy's cautionary tale, the example of what happens when evolution goes wrong. But they never asked themselves one crucial question: what happens when that rage has a righteous target? When the Devourers came from the void between galaxies, ancient, hungry, and utterly without mercy, the enlightened civilizations discovered that their millennia of peace had cost them something vital. They had forgotten how to fight, how to hate, how to burn with the fury needed to face extinction itself. In their darkest hour, when their perfect worlds were falling one by one to an enemy that knew only consumption, they finally understood what humanity's anger was truly for. It wasn't mindless violence or primitive aggression. It was the last line of defense between civilization and the dark. Ambassador Veltar of the Maltari Collective stood before the curved viewport of the orbital station, watching the gentle aurora that danced across Kepler Prime's atmosphere. The sight usually brought him peace, but today his telepathic tendrils writhed with anxiety. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for a reason that chilled him to his crystalline core. The Devourers had returned. Behind him, representatives from 47 different species filled the amphitheater-style chamber. Their voices created a discordant symphony of fear, denial, and desperate hope. The holographic display at the center showed the grim evidence. 17 outer rim colonies, simply gone. Not destroyed, not conquered, consumed. Stripped down to their component atoms and absorbed into something vast and hungry. The temporal displacement readings are consistent, reported Dr. Zinthara, the Kethvar science advisor, her forearms manipulating data streams with practiced efficiency. These entities exist partially outside our normal space-time. Our conventional weapons pass through them like shadows. A ripple of panic swept through the gathered delegates. The Zephyrian representative, a being of living crystal named Resonance of Truth, chimed with distress. In our archives, there are legends, stories of the great hunger that came before civilization. We believe them to be myths. The myths are real, confirmed Elderthas of the Volcani Empire. His massive frame, usually a symbol of strength, seemed diminished. Our oldest records speak of entities that consumed entire star clusters, beings from the spaces between galaxies that feed on organized matter and energy. Veltar turned from the viewport, his telepathic abilities picking up the waves of terror emanating from every mind in the chamber. Centuries of peace, of careful diplomacy, and reasoned discourse had left the galaxy's civilizations woefully unprepared for an enemy that couldn't be negotiated with or understood. "What of our military forces?" asked Commander Zixta of the Hegemony Defense Corps. Her insectoid features twitched with nervous energy. "Surely our combined fleets have been tested against the smaller scouts," interrupted Admiral Corvin of the Maltari Fleet Command. The burly amphibian's usual confidence was nowhere to be found. 90% casualty rates. Our energy weapons dissipate harmlessly. Kinetic projectiles pass through their forms. They seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The chamber fell silent except for the low hum of life support systems. Veltar could feel the weight of despair settling over the assembly like a funeral shroud. These beings, these civilized races that had spent millennia perfecting the arts of peace and cooperation, were facing an enemy that rendered all their achievements meaningless. There must be something, whispered resonance of truth. Some weapon, some strategy we haven't considered. Dr. Zinthera's forearms moved across her console with increasing desperation. The quantum resonance patterns suggest they're vulnerable to specific emotional wavelengths, particularly those associated with intense negative emotions like rage and hatred. But our species have evolved beyond such primitive responses. A bitter laugh echoed through the chamber. It came from a single human representative, a woman named Captain Sarah Chun, who sat in the observer section. She was there only because an ancient treaty required all spacefaring species to be represented, even the quarantined ones. The laughter stopped, and every eye in the chamber turned to the human. She stood slowly, her simple gray uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other delegates. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a hardness that made several delegates unconsciously step backward. "You want to know about rage?" Captain Chin's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "About hatred and fury and all those primitive emotions you've spent so long congratulating yourselves for outgrowing?" Veltar felt a chill run through his telepathic senses. There was something in the human's mind, a controlled fire that burned with an intensity he'd never encountered. It wasn't the wild, chaotic violence their species was known for. This was focused, purposeful, and absolutely terrifying. "We've been monitoring your communications," Chun continued, stepping down from the observer's gallery toward the main floor. "My government has been tracking these devourers since they first appeared in our sensor range 6 months ago." The chamber erupted in accusations and demands. How dare the humans spy on their communications? Why hadn't they shared this intelligence? The noise was deafening until Chun simply raised her hand, and something in her expression silenced the room. "You quarantined us," she said simply. "Called us savages, monsters, refused our trade, our friendship, our warnings about threats we detected in the galactic rim. You made it very clear that humanity wasn't welcome in your perfect little civilization." Elderthas leaned forward in his seat. "If you have information about these entities, surely—" "Oh, we have more than information," Chen interrupted. "We have a plan. See, while you were all evolving beyond your base emotions, we were learning to harness them, to focus them, to weaponize them." She activated a portable holographic projector, and suddenly the chamber was filled with images that made several delegates recoil in horror. Human soldiers, their faces painted with aggressive designs, wielding weapons that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Ships bristling with armaments that looked more like instruments of torture than tools of war. Rage-powered plasma cannons, Chen explained calmly. Fury-focused particle beams. Hatred-enhanced kinetic accelerators. When we discovered that these entities feed on organized matter and energy but are vulnerable to specific emotional wavelengths, we did what humans do best. We got angry, and then we got creative. The silence that followed was deafening. Veltar found himself staring at the human woman with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. The weapon she displayed seemed almost alive, powered by the very emotions that civilized society had rejected. The Devourers are coming, Chun continued. Our long-range scouts estimate 3 weeks before they reach the core systems. Your fleets can't stop them. Your weapons can't touch them. Your peaceful philosophies are utterly useless against an enemy that wants to consume everything you are, everything you've built, everyone you love. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. But we can stop them. The savage humans with our primitive emotions and our barbaric methods. We can do what you cannot. We can hate them enough to hurt them. Admiral Corvin rose from his seat, his amphibian features flushed with indignation. You're talking about allying with a species that the Council deemed too dangerous for civilized space. The risk, Chin cut him off, is extinction. For all of us. The Devourers don't care about your enlightened philosophies or your peaceful intentions. They see organized matter and energy, and they consume it. End of story. Dr. Zinthera's 4 arms had stopped moving across her console. Even if what you say is true, how could we trust you? Humanity's capacity for violence is well documented. Chun smiled, and the expression was anything but reassuring. You can't trust us. We are everything you fear, angry, violent, unpredictable. We solve problems by breaking things and hurting people. We've turned warfare into an art form and violence into a science. She gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed star maps with human fleet positions. But here's the thing about monsters. Sometimes you need one to fight another. The Devourers are coming, and when they arrive, you'll have a choice. You can maintain your moral superiority while they consume your worlds and your people, or you can let the enraged humans do what we do best. The chamber remained silent for long moments. Veltar could feel the conflict raging in every mind present. The desperate need for survival warring against centuries of conditioning that labeled violence as the ultimate evil. The human woman stood calmly in the center of it all, radiating a confidence that was both inspiring and terrifying. Finally, it was Resonance of Truth who spoke, the crystalline being's voice chiming with resignation. What would you require? Full access to your industrial centers, Chen replied without hesitation. Raw materials for our weapons. Passage rights through all civilized space. And, most importantly, complete operational autonomy. No oversight, no committees, no debates about the moral implications of our methods. The terms were staggering. Essentially, Chan was asking for the keys to galactic civilization, the very thing the quarantine had been designed to prevent. The Council could never agree to such terms, protested Ambassador Veltar. To give humanity unrestricted access, then you'll die as civilized beings, Chen said flatly. Your choice. She began walking back toward the observers section, her message delivered. Our fleet commanders are standing by. 3 weeks until the Devourers reach Kepler Prime. 2 weeks if you want any chance of mounting an effective defense. The clock is ticking. As she reached the exit, Chen paused and looked back at the assembled delegates. You know, for all your talk about civilization and enlightenment, you've forgotten the most important truth in the universe. Sometimes the only thing standing between light and dark isn't wisdom or peace or understanding. Sometimes it's just someone angry enough to fight. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. 47 civilizations, representing trillions of beings, faced the most difficult decision in galactic history. Trust the monsters they'd spent centuries fearing, or face extinction at the hands of something far worse. Veltar returned to the viewport, watching the gentle aurora dance across Kepler Prime's atmosphere. Soon, he thought, those lights might be the last beautiful thing anyone would ever see. unless they were willing to let the darkness fight the dark. The Maltari industrial complex of Syndros 7 had never seen anything like it. What had once been orderly production lines creating art, literature, and philosophical treatises was now a churning chaos of human military engineering. Captain Chun watched from the observation deck as her people transformed the peaceful manufacturing center into something that would have given the original designers nightmares. Below her, human engineers moved with a purpose that bordered on obsession. They welded armor plating inscribed with aggressive symbols, calibrated weapons that hummed with barely contained violence, and assembled ammunition that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that made the Maltari workers uncomfortable and afraid. "I'm beginning to question the wisdom of this alliance," muttered Director HFY, the Maltari overseer assigned to coordinate with the human forces. His amphibian features were pale with stress, and his telepathic abilities kept recoiling from the emotional intensity radiating from the human work crews. She didn't look away from the production floor. "Having second thoughts? These weapons you're creating, they're not just tools. They're alive, feeding on emotion, on rage." HFY's voice trembled slightly. "What happens when this is over? How do we know you won't turn them on us?" For the first time since arriving, Chun turned to face the Maltari director. Her eyes held a weariness that surprised him. Not the wild fury he'd expected, but something deeper and more controlled. "Because we're not the monsters you think we are," she said quietly. "We're the monsters we choose to be. There's a difference." Before HFY could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as urgent messages scrolled across every display screen. Chin's personal communicator crackled to life. "Captain, this is Admiral Torres aboard the Retribution. We're receiving emergency transmissions from the Kepler defense grid. The Devourers have accelerated their approach. ETA reduced to 72 hours. Chin's jaw tightened. They'd hoped for more time to prepare, to integrate their weapons systems with the galactic defense networks. Now they'd have to make do with what they had. "All ships to combat readiness," she ordered. "Begin deployment of rage-pattern weapons to Allied vessels. And give me a direct line to every human commander in the sector." Within minutes, the observation deck had been converted into a makeshift command center. Holographic displays showed the deployment of human forces throughout the galaxy. A vast network of ships, weapons platforms, and orbital installations, all designed around a single principle: the weaponization of pure emotional energy. Commander Reyes materialized as a hologram, his scarred face grim. Strike Group Alpha is in position at the Proxima defense line. Rage cannon arrays are fully charged and ready. Strike Group Beta reporting, came another voice. "We've got 15 civilized species vessels equipped with Fury enhancement modules. The crews are struggling with the emotional requirements." Chin nodded. That had been expected. The civilized species had spent so long suppressing their aggressive instincts that most of their people couldn't generate the level of anger necessary to power human weapons effectively. "What about our volunteers?" she asked. A new hologram appeared. Lieutenant Martinez, looking exhausted but determined. "We've got about 3,000 from various species willing to undergo rage conditioning. The Zephyrians are surprisingly adaptable once they stop trying to harmonize with the energy patterns. And the others? Mixed results. The Kethvar are too intellectually focused. They analyze the emotion instead of feeling it. The Volcani show promise, but their anger is too cold, too controlled. The Maltari." Martinez glanced apologetically at Director HFY. "Their telepathic nature makes them vulnerable to emotional feedback. Most can't handle the intensity. Chun studied the tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. The enemy moved like a living shadow across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. Where star systems had once existed, now there was only void, not destroyed matter, but matter that had never been. Captain, another voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Kim, the human xenobiologist who'd been studying the Devourer specimens. I've got the analysis you requested on the emotional frequency requirements. A new display materialized, showing complex wave patterns and energy signatures. The Devourers exist partially outside our dimensional space, which is why conventional weapons can't touch them. But intense emotional energy, particularly rage and hatred, creates quantum resonance patterns that could force them back into normal space. In simple terms, Doctor, we have to hate them hard enough to make them real, and then we can kill them. Director HFY made a sound of distress. This is madness. You're talking about deliberately cultivating the most destructive emotions imaginable. Yes, Chin agreed. We are. Because sometimes madness is the only sane response to an insane situation. She activated the fleet-wide communication system. Across the galaxy, every human ship, every allied vessel, every defense platform received her signal. Her voice carried to millions of people preparing for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. All units, this is Captain Chun. In 68 hours, we're going to face an enemy that wants to unmake everything we are. They don't negotiate. They don't surrender. They consume. They've already eaten 17 of our colonies, absorbed billions of lives into their endless hunger. On the displays, Chun could see the faces of human commanders, their expressions hardening with each word. She could also see the alien allies, confused, frightened, but listening. For those of you from the civilized species, I know this is difficult. You've been taught that anger is wrong, that hatred is evil, that violence is the last refuge of the primitive. Today, I'm asking you to forget everything you've learned about being civilized. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I'm asking you to remember what it feels like to be afraid, to be helpless, to watch something you love being destroyed while you stand by unable to stop it. I'm asking you to take that fear and transform it into something useful, into rage. Dr. Kim stepped forward, beginning emotional frequency amplification in 3, 2. Throughout the complex, a low hum began to build. Human-designed emotion amplifiers activated, sending waves of carefully modulated energy through the assembled forces. Chun felt it herself, the familiar burn of controlled fury that had been trained into every human soldier since childhood. But something else was happening. The alien crew members were beginning to respond. Director HFY suddenly straightened, his telepathic tendrils writhing not with anxiety, but with something darker. On the displays, she could see similar transformations occurring across the galaxy. Zephyrian crystals pulsing with red light instead of their usual blue. Kethvar scientists abandoning their analytical detachment. Volcani warriors remembering emotions they'd thought dead. Good, Chen said, her voice carrying the approval of a teacher whose students had finally grasped a difficult lesson. Now hold on to that feeling. Nurture it. Feed it with every memory of loss, every moment of helplessness, every injustice you've ever witnessed. Commander Reyes' voice crackled through the communicator. Captain, we're detecting massive energy spikes from Allied vessels. Their weapon systems are coming online. Chun smiled, and it was an expression that would have terrified any civilized being who saw it. Around her, the observation deck had transformed into something that looked more like a war shrine than a command center. Humans and Aliens worked side by side, their faces painted with aggressive symbols, their weapons humming with barely contained violence. "Status report on the Devourer fleet," she requested. "Long-range sensors show them entering the outer defense perimeter in 64 hours, reported Lieutenant Colonel Santos. "But, Captain, there are more of them than we initially estimated. A lot more." The tactical display updated, showing the true scope of what they faced. What had appeared to be a fleet of several dozen entities was actually hundreds, possibly thousands. Each one was massive beyond comprehension, living voids in space that consumed matter and energy with casual efficiency. The mood in the command center shifted. Even with all their preparation, all their rage-powered weapons, the odds were staggering. "Ma'am," whispered a young human ensign, "how do we fight something like that?" Chen looked at the display for a long moment, then activated her personal communicator. "Admiral Torres, are the planet crackers ready?" Loaded and standing by came the grim response. "But, Captain, using them, well, I know what it will cost," Chen interrupted. "Sometimes the price of victory is everything you're fighting to protect." She turned to address the assembled command staff, human and alien alike. "The Devourers think they're hunting prey. They've consumed 17 colonies without significant resistance. They're expecting more easy meals." Her voice hardened. "They're about to learn the difference between eating sheep and fighting wolves. All units, prepare for final weapons check. In 60 hours, we show them why humanity was quarantined in the first place." Director Hestai approached her as the command staff dispersed to their duties. "Captain Chun, after this is over, assuming we survive, what happens then? How does the galaxy deal with the fact that it took monsters to save it?" Chun didn't answer immediately. She watched the production lines below, where weapons of unimaginable destructive power were being completed by beings who had never known war. "That's a problem for after," she finally said. "Right now, the only thing that matters is making sure there is an after." The first Devourer emerged from the quantum fold like a wound in reality itself. Ambassador Veltar watched from the bridge of the Maltari command ship Harmony's Dream, his telepathic senses reeling from the wrongness of the creature. It wasn't just alien, it was antithetical to existence itself, a living negation that hurt to perceive. "Contact," reported the sensor operator, her voice strained. "Massive quantum distortion at grid reference 77 Alpha. It's beautiful." Veltar shared the sentiment, though it filled him with horror. The Devourer moved like liquid shadow, given form, its surface rippling with patterns that suggested vast intelligence and hungry purpose. Where it passed, space itself seemed to flinch, as if the universe was trying to heal wounds it couldn't see. "Range to target?" asked Admiral Corvin from the command center. "For 100,000 kilometers and closing. Energy signatures are impossible. Its reading is both massive and massless, hot and cold, existing and not existing." Around them, the combined fleet of 47 civilizations spread across the defensive grid. Thousands of ships, from graceful Zephyrian crystal vessels to the massive bioships of the hegemony. It should have been an impressive sight, but Veltar could feel the fear radiating from every crew member through his telepathic abilities. "Where are the humans?" demanded Commander Zixta from the Righteous Purpose. "We need their rage weapons now." Standing by as ordered, came Captain Chen's voice over the communication channel. There was something different about her tone, a cold satisfaction that made Veltar's skin crawl. "Remember, Admiral, conventional weapons first. We need to confirm their ineffectiveness before we reveal our capabilities." It was a brutal strategy, but tactically sound. The Devourers had to believe they were facing the same helpless resistance they'd encountered at the outer colonies. The real weapons would come as a surprise. All ships opened fire. Admiral Corvin commanded. The galaxy's finest military technology unleashed itself against the approaching entity. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, particle beams that could cut through neutron star hulls, quantum torpedoes that could devastate entire fleets. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize multiple star systems. It did absolutely nothing. The energy beams passed through the Devourer like light through shadow. The particle streams dispersed harmlessly against its non-corporeal form. The quantum torpedoes detonated uselessly in normal space while their target existed partially elsewhere. "No effect," reported the weapons officer, panic creeping into his voice. "All weapons ineffective." On the displays, they watched the Devourer continue its approach, utterly unaffected by their assault. Its surface rippled with what might have been amusement as it extended feeding tendrils toward the nearest ship, a Kethvar science vessel. The infinite curiosity simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but absorbed into the Devourer's mass. Veltar felt the telepathic screams of the crew cut off mid-thought as they were transformed into component energy and matter. Phase 1 complete. Chen's voice carried across the communication channel. "All ships withdraw to secondary positions. Humanity is assuming tactical command." What happened next defied everything the civilized galaxy thought they knew about warfare. The space around the Devourers suddenly erupted with human ships, not the sleek, efficient designs preferred by galactic civilization, but angular, aggressive vessels that looked like they'd been designed by madmen. Their hulls were covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and they radiated an emotional intensity that could be felt across multiple star systems. "Humanity, this is Admiral Corvin. What are you doing? Your ships are too close to the target." "No," Chen replied, and her voice carried a satisfaction that chilled every listener. "We're exactly where we need to be." The human ships opened fire. The weapons they unleashed were nothing like the clean, efficient armaments of civilized warfare. These were instruments of focused hatred given physical form. Rage-powered plasma cannons that burned not just with heat, but with the fury of billions of angry minds. Fury-enhanced particle beams that carried the weight of every injustice humanity had ever suffered. Kinetic accelerators powered by the pure, distilled essence of violent intent. For the first time since entering the galaxy, a Devourer screamed. The sound was felt rather than heard, a psychic wail of pain and surprise that echoed across multiple dimensions. The creature's form solidified as the emotional resonance weapons forced it back into normal space, making it vulnerable to conventional physics. "Target is manifesting in standard dimensional space," reported Dr. Zenthera from her analysis station. "The emotional frequency weapons are working." But the human assault was just beginning. More ships emerged from Quantum Fold. Not just military vessels, but converted civilian craft, mining ships, even pleasure yachts. Each one bristled with weapons powered by human emotion, and each crew member radiated an intensity that made seasoned military officers step back in alarm. "This is Commander Martinez aboard the Vengeance. Beginning close assault pattern." Veltar watched in fascination and horror as human tactics unfolded. Where civilized warfare was conducted at safe distances with precise, measured strikes, the humans flew their ships directly into combat range. They maneuvered with reckless abandon, using their own vessels as weapons when necessary. The Devourer fought back, extending tendrils of consuming energy that should have absorbed the human ships effortlessly. Instead, they met shields powered by pure, focused hatred that refused to be unmade. When tentacles struck hull, plating inscribed with aggressive symbols, they recoiled as if burned. "Impossible," whispered resonance of truth from the Zephyrian command ship. "How are they surviving direct contact?" "Because they're not fighting with technology," Chin's voice carried across the communication channel. "They're fighting with everything that makes them human. Every injustice, every loss, every moment of helpless rage transformed into something useful." More devourers began emerging from the quantum fold, drawn by their companions' distress calls. What had been a single entity became 5, then 10, then 20. Each one was massive beyond comprehension, their combined presence warping space-time around them. "Human fleet, withdraw," ordered Admiral Corvin. "You're outnumbered." "Not yet," Shin replied. "All ships, switch to pattern Omega. Let's show them what real anger looks like." The human vessels suddenly began broadcasting on frequencies that made every psychic species in the area reel in pain. They were transmitting pure, undiluted emotion, not just anger, but the full spectrum of human fury. Grief for the lost colonies, rage at the devourer's casual destruction, hatred for an enemy that treated intelligent life as mere food. The effect was immediate and devastating. Space itself seemed to catch fire as the emotional broadcast created quantum resonance patterns that forced the devourers into full manifestation. Suddenly, beings that had existed partially outside reality found themselves trapped in normal dimensional space, subject to the laws of physics they'd been ignoring. "All allied ships, open fire," Shin commanded. "Target the manifestation points." This time, the conventional weapons of the galactic fleet found their mark. The devourers, forced into corporeal form by human emotional warfare, began taking damage from plasma cannons and particle beams. Their screams of pain and rage echoed across multiple star systems. But they were learning. The entities began adapting their tactics, trying to phase back into their safe dimensional space. That's when the humans revealed their true strategy. "Initiating Fury Protocol," announced Admiral Torres from the Retribution. "All ships, prepare for emotional overload." Veltar felt it before he understood what was happening. Every human in the fleet suddenly began broadcasting at maximum intensity. Not just their own emotions, but amplified versions of every traumatic memory, every moment of loss, every instant of righteous fury their species had ever experienced. The psychic backlash was overwhelming. Telepathic species across the galaxy cried out in pain as the emotional storm washed over them. But the devourers suffered even more. Designed to consume organized matter and energy, they found themselves flooded with chaotic emotional patterns that they couldn't process or absorb. "They're destabilizing," reported Dr. Zenthera. "The emotional overflow is disrupting their quantum coherence." On the tactical displays, they watched as the devourers began to writhe and convulse. Their perfect forms started breaking apart, unable to maintain cohesion in the face of the human emotional assault. "Now," Shin commanded. All ships concentrated fire on the primary targets. The combined fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy weapons that had been useless moments before now found purchase against enemies trapped in normal space. The devourers, caught between dimensions and unable to phase to safety, began dying. Their deaths were spectacular, violent explosions of exotic matter and energy that lit up the surrounding star systems. Where moments before there had been entities that could consume entire worlds, now there were only expanding clouds of cosmic debris. Sector 7 clear, reported Commander Reyes. All devourer entities neutralized. Cheers erupted across the communication channels as the magnitude of their victory sank in. They had done the impossible. They had defeated beings that the galaxy's greatest minds had declared unbeatable. But their celebration was short-lived. "Captain Chun," came Dr. Kim's urgent voice. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive quantum distortions at the galactic rim. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands." The tactical display updated, showing what they all feared to see. The entities they defeated were just the advanced scouts. The real Devourer fleet was still coming, and it was larger than anyone had imagined. "How long?" Chen asked quietly. 18 hours until the main force reaches the outer defense perimeter. The command channels fell silent as the enormity of what they faced became clear. They had won the first battle using everything they had, and it had barely been enough to defeat a scouting force. "Captain," Veltar transmitted privately to Chun, "your people have performed miracles today. No one could ask for more." Chin's response was immediate and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. "Ambassador, we haven't even started fighting yet." The war room aboard the human flagship Retribution had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to any civilized species just days before. The walls were covered with tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer armada, but between them hung banners inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. The air itself hummed with barely contained emotional energy as human commanders planned what might be the galaxy's last stand. Captain Chin stood before the central holographic display, her face painted with war markings that made her look like something from humanity's darkest legends. Around her, officers from 47 different species worked alongside human personnel, all of them bearing similar markings, visible symbols of their willing descent into controlled savagery. "Status report," Chin commanded, her voice carrying an authority that no one in the room would have dared to question. Commander Martinez stepped forward, his scarred features grim. "The main Devourer force consists of approximately 1,200 entities, ranging from scout class to what our analysis suggests are world killers. ETA to the core systems is 14 hours. Admiral Torres materialized as a hologram, his massive frame somehow managing to look both determined and resigned. Our own forces are at 60% strength after the first engagement. Conventional allied ships have proven effective against manifested devourers, but we can only force manifestation through emotional overload, and our people are already pushed to their limits." The toll of the Fury Protocol was visible on every human face in the room. The technique that allowed them to force devourers into normal space required them to channel emotions so intense that most civilized species would have been driven insane. Even humans, who had spent generations training for emotional warfare, were showing signs of strain. "What about the new volunteers?" asked Dr. Kim, the xenobiologist who had become their expert on interspecies emotional resonance patterns. Lieutenant Colonel Santos answered from his position at a tactical console. "We've got another 5,000 from various species willing to undergo emergency rage conditioning. The Zephyrians are surprisingly effective once they stop trying to harmonize with the emotional patterns and just let themselves feel angry." Chen nodded. The crystalline Zephyrians had proven to be natural emotional amplifiers once they abandoned their philosophical commitment to harmony and balance. Watching a being of living crystal radiate pure fury was both inspiring and terrifying. "The Kethvar contingent has developed some interesting innovations," continued Santos. Their analytical nature actually helps. They're treating anger like a chemical reaction and optimizing the efficiency of their hatred. And the Volcani? Their warrior culture is adapting well. They're calling it honorable rage and incorporating it into their battle hymns. The Maltari, Santos, glanced apologetically at the amphibian representatives in the room. Their telepathic abilities make them excellent emotional broadcasters, but the feedback is dangerous. We've had 3 mental breakdowns already. Ambassador Veltar stepped forward from where he'd been observing the human planning session. His usual composure was gone, replaced by something darker that still shocked him when he caught glimpses of it in reflective surfaces. Captain Chun, my people have been analyzing the Devourer communication patterns intercepted during the first engagement. We believe we understand their command structure. A new holographic display materialized, showing the complex hierarchy of the approaching armada. At its center was something that dwarfed even the largest entities they'd already faced, a massive presence that seemed to exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The Apex Devourer, Veltar explained, his telepathic abilities recoiling from even the recorded emanations. It appears to be the central intelligence controlling the entire swarm. If we could somehow destroy or disable it, the rest would be vulnerable, Chen finished. But look at the size of that thing. It's larger than most space stations. Dr. Zinthura, the Kethvar scientist, manipulated the display with her 4 arms. The quantum signatures suggest it exists primarily outside our dimensional space. Forcing it to manifest would require emotional energy on a scale we've never attempted. What kind of scale? Chen asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer. Complete emotional overload of every psychic-capable being in the galaxy, Dr. Zinthera replied quietly. The feedback alone would kill millions, possibly billions. And there's no guarantee it would work. The room fell silent as the magnitude of what they were discussing sank in. They were talking about weaponizing the emotional energy of an entire galactic civilization, turning every feeling being into a component of a weapon system designed for genocide. There has to be another way, protested Commander Zixta, the insectoid officer's mandibles clicking with distress. We can't ask billions to sacrifice themselves for a plan that might not even work. Chun turned to face the assembled command staff, her painted features making her look like a vision from humanity's most violent nightmares. Commander, how many people are going to die if the Devourers reach the core systems? Trillions, Zixta admitted reluctantly. But to deliberately choose which trillions die instead of letting the enemy choose for us, Chun interrupted. That's what command decisions are. She activated the galaxy-wide communication system, her signal reaching every human ship, every allied vessel, every defense station across known space. Her voice carried to billions of beings preparing for what they all knew might be their final battle. All units, this is Captain Chun with a strategic update. Long-range analysis indicates the approaching Devourer force includes an apex entity that appears to coordinate the entire swarm. Eliminating this target could cripple their ability to operate as a unified force. Pauses between words carried weight as she let the implications settle. However, forcing manifestation of an entity this size will require unprecedented levels of emotional energy. I'm authorizing implementation of Protocol Omega-7, galactic-scale emotional broadcast. The communication channels erupted with responses, shock, fear, determination, and, in some cases, eager acceptance. Protocol Omega-7 was theoretical, a doomsday option that had never been seriously considered for actual use. All human vessels will serve as primary broadcast nodes, Chun continued. Allied ships with compatible crew will provide secondary amplification. Every telepathic species, every emotion-sensitive being, every person capable of generating significant psychological energy will be asked to contribute to a single, coordinated expression of fury. Admiral Torres' hologram flickered as he consulted tactical displays aboard his own ship. Captain, the power requirements alone could overload our emotional amplification systems. We're talking about channeling the anger of an entire galactic civilization. I know, Chun replied, and we're going to do it anyway. She turned to address the alien officers in the room directly. I won't lie to you about the risks. This will be the largest deliberate psychological trauma ever inflicted on a galactic scale. The emotional feedback will be intense. People will be permanently changed by this experience. Some won't survive it. Resonance of Truth, the Zephyrian representative, chimed with what might have been acceptance or resignation. But if we don't try, everyone dies anyway. Exactly. Chun began issuing orders with the efficiency of someone who had been planning for this possibility since the first Devourer appeared. Dr. Kim, I need emotional resonance maps for every major population center. Identify the strongest psychic amplifiers in each system. Commander Santos, coordinate with Allied fleet commands. Every ship capable of emotional broadcast needs to be positioned for maximum effect. We're going to turn the entire galaxy into a single weapon. Admiral Torres, begin charging the planet crackers. If Protocol Omega-7 fails, we'll need backup options. The reference to planet crackers sent a chill through the room. Those weapons were designed to destroy entire worlds. A literally scorched earth strategy that would deny the Devourers their targets by eliminating them entirely. As the command staff dispersed to carry out their orders, Veltar approached Chun privately. Captain, after this is over, assuming we survive, how do we live with what we've done? How does a civilization recover from deliberately weaponizing its own collective psyche? Chun was quiet for a moment, studying tactical displays that showed the approaching darkness. Ambassador, do you know why humanity was quarantined? Because your species was deemed too violent, too unpredictable for civilized space. That's what everyone believes. But the real reason was fear. Fear of what we represented. You see, every other species in the galaxy achieved civilization by evolving beyond their violent instincts. You became peaceful, rational, controlled. You forgot how to be monsters. She gestured toward the displays, showing human forces preparing for battle alongside their alien allies. But we never forgot. We just learned to control it, to channel it, to use it as a tool instead of being used by it. That's what made us dangerous. Not that we were violent, but that we were violently rational. And now you understand why monsters are sometimes necessary. The Devourers don't care about your philosophy or your peaceful intentions. They see organized matter and energy, and they consume it. Period. Shin activated her personal communicator. All ships begin final preparations for Protocol Omega-7. In 8 hours, we're going to show the universe what happens when you threaten something that monsters love. The communication ended, and Chun returned to the tactical displays. Around her, beings from 47 different species worked with desperate efficiency, preparing to transform themselves into weapons. Outside the viewports, space began to fill with energy patterns as ships across the galaxy charged their emotional amplification systems. What had once been a peaceful corner of the universe was becoming something else entirely, an arsenal of consciousness itself, ready to strike back at the dark. In 12 hours, they would discover whether love could be made into a weapon terrible enough to save everything they held dear. The apex devourer emerged from the quantum fold like a god of entropy made manifest. Ambassador Veltar felt his sanity strain as he tried to comprehend the scale of the entity that now dominated local space. A living void larger than gas giants, its surface rippling with patterns that suggested intelligence beyond mortal understanding. Around it, the Devourer Armada spread across three-star systems like a cancer of negation. Where they passed, space itself seemed to wither, and the quantum foundations of reality grew thin and uncertain. 1,200 entities, each one capable of consuming entire worlds, moved with the coordinated precision of a single vast organism. "Contact," reported the sensor operator aboard the Harmony's Dream, her voice breaking with strain. Mass quantum displacement across all tactical grids. They're everywhere. Captain Chen's voice cut across the communication channels with the cold certainty of someone who had passed beyond fear into pure purpose. "All ships, initiate protocol Omega-7. Begin emotional overload sequence." Across the galaxy, a transformation began unlike anything in recorded history. On the human flagship Retribution, Admiral Torres stood before a device that no civilized species would have dared to build, an emotional amplification array designed to broadcast the collective psychic energy of an entire galactic civilization. As it powered up, the air itself began to scream with barely contained fury. "Amplifier arrays online," reported Dr. Kim, her hands dancing across controls that channeled pure human emotion into devastating weapon systems, reading optimal resonance patterns from all allied vessels. But it wasn't just the military forces that answered the call. Across thousands of worlds, billions of beings felt the summons and responded. On Zephyr Prime, crystalline entities that had spent millennia in perfect harmony suddenly blazed with righteous anger, their forms shifting from gentle blue to violent crimson. In the depths of Kethvar space stations, analytical minds that had never known passion burned with calculated fury. The Maltari home world's entire population joined their telepathic abilities into a single, focused broadcast of protective rage. Volcani warriors on 100 different worlds roared battle cries that echoed across dimensional barriers. Even the peaceful agricultural worlds of the Outer Rim contributed what they could, simple farmers and artists and teachers lending their anger to the cause. Emotional resonance at 40% and climbing, announced Commander Martinez from his position aboard the converted mining ship Vengeance, reading massive psychic activity from every populated system in the galaxy. Veltar felt it building, a tide of emotions so vast and terrible that it made his telepathic abilities recoil in self-defense. This wasn't the controlled anger that humans had taught them to weaponize. This was something primal and terrible, the collective fury of an entire galactic civilization facing extinction. 60%, Martinez continued. 70. Warning indicators are going critical across all human vessels. "Hold the line," Chun commanded, though Veltar could hear the strain in her voice. Even humans had limits, and they were approaching theirs rapidly. The Devourers began their final approach, their movements casual and confident. They had consumed 17 civilizations without meaningful resistance. To them, this was simply another feeding ground, another collection of organized matter and energy to be absorbed. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Emotional resonance at 90%, Martinez reported. Hull stress indicators critical. Captain, if we push much further, do it, Chun ordered. All systems, maximum overload. Give me everything. What happened next shattered the laws of physics across multiple star systems. The combined emotional energy of trillions of intelligent beings, focused through human technology and amplified beyond all reasonable limits, created quantum resonance patterns that forced reality itself to change. Space warped as the broadcast reached levels that made dimensional barriers irrelevant. The effect on the Devourers was immediate and catastrophic. Entities that existed partially outside normal space found themselves yanked into full manifestation as the emotional storm overwhelmed their quantum coherence. The apex devourer, that massive intelligence that had coordinated the destruction of countless civilizations, suddenly materialized completely in normal dimensional space for the first time in eons. Its scream of pain and confusion echoed across multiple realities. "Target manifested," shouted Dr. Zinthera from her analysis station. "Full dimensional presence confirmed. It's vulnerable. All ships, concentrated fire on the apex target." Chun commanded. "Everything we have." The combined fleet of 47 civilizations opened fire with weapons systems powered by the most intense emotions their species had ever experienced. Energy beams that carried the weight of parental love transformed into protective fury. Kinetic projectiles that bore the concentrated essence of righteous indignation. Plasma torrents that burned with the collective determination to survive. The apex devourer, caught between dimensions and unable to phase to safety, began taking damage. Its perfect form started breaking apart as conventional physics finally had something solid to work against. But it wasn't defenseless. Tendrils of consuming energy lashed out from the massive entity, each one capable of absorbing entire ships. The righteous purpose simply ceased to exist as one tendril made contact, its crew of 3,000 transformed into component energy in an instant. "Keep firing," Chun commanded as more ships fell to the apex devourer's desperate counterattack. "Don't let it escape back to quantum space." The human vessels pressed their attack with suicidal determination, using their ships themselves as weapons when necessary. The Vengeance rammed directly into one of the apex devourer's feeding tendrils, its crew screaming battle cries as they were consumed. But their sacrifice bought precious seconds for other ships to concentrate fire on the resulting weakness. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12. Reported damage control aboard the Retribution. Emotional amplifiers overloading. "We can't maintain this level of output much longer." "We don't need much longer," Chin replied, watching as the combined fire from hundreds of ships began to tell. The apex devourer was wounded, its perfect form marred by gaps where conventional weapons had finally found purchase. But the entity was learning, adapting. It began trying to phase back into its safe dimensional space, using techniques that had protected it for millions of years. That's when Chun revealed humanity's final gambit. "All ships, implement Rage Pattern Omega," she commanded. Personal authorization Chun Alpha 779. Across the human fleet, weapons systems that had been held in reserve suddenly came online. These weren't the rage-powered cannons or fury-enhanced particle beams they'd been using. These were something far more dangerous, devices that weaponized love itself. "Deploying memorial cores," announced Admiral Torres. "All hands, prepare for psychological feedback." The memorial cores were humanity's darkest secret, weapons powered not by anger, but by the opposite emotion. Each one contained the psychic imprints of everything humanity had lost to the Devourers, 17 colonies, millions of dead, entire worlds reduced to cosmic dust. But instead of being powered by hatred for the enemy, they channeled pure love for what had been destroyed. The effect was devastating. Love, it turned out, was an even more destructive emotion than rage when properly weaponized. The memorial cores projected waves of protective fury so intense that space itself began to crystallize around the apex devourer. The entity found itself trapped not just in normal dimensional space, but locked into a quantum prison created by the galaxy's collective love for its own survival. Target is completely manifested and contained, reported Dr. Kim. It can't phase shift. All ships, final assault pattern, Chun commanded. Let's end this. What followed was not a battle, but an execution. The apex devourer, stripped of its dimensional mobility and caught between realities, was systematically destroyed by the combined fire of every weapon in the galactic fleet. Its death was spectacular, a cascade of exotic matter and energy that lit up 3-star systems. With their central intelligence destroyed, the remaining devourers began to lose cohesion. Some tried to flee back to the intergalactic void, others turned on each other in confusion. The galaxy's forces, still riding the high of their impossible victory, hunted down the survivors with methodical efficiency. Last confirmed devourer eliminated, reported Commander Reyes 6 hours later. All sectors clear. The threat is neutralized. The cheers that erupted across the communication channels were heard on thousands of worlds. They had done the impossible, defeated an enemy that could unmake reality itself. But the victory had come at a cost. In the aftermath, as the galaxy began to assess the damage, the true scope of what they had done became clear. Billions of beings had been deliberately traumatized, their emotions weaponized on a scale never before attempted. Entire species would need generations to recover from the psychological wounds. Captain Chin stood on the observation deck of the Retribution, watching repair crews work to fix the damage from the emotional overload. Around her, beings from dozens of species moved with the easy camaraderie of warriors who had fought together and survived. Ambassador Veltar approached, his features showing the strain of what he'd experienced. Captain, the Galactic Council is requesting a full report on human activities during the crisis. Of course they are, Chin replied without turning from the viewport. What will you tell them? The truth, that when salvation came, it was the enraged humans who answered. That sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and the dark is someone angry enough to fight. Chin smiled, and for the first time in months, it held no trace of violence or threat. And after that, what happens when the galaxy realizes it was saved by the monsters they tried so hard to contain? I suspect, Veltar said thoughtfully, that we'll be having a very different conversation about what it means to be civilized. In the distance, human ships and alien vessels worked side by side, their crews bearing the psychological scars of what they'd accomplished. They had saved the galaxy by becoming the very thing they'd spent centuries trying not to be. And somehow, that felt like exactly the right way to do it. The stars shone a little brighter that day, as if the universe itself was grateful that someone had been angry enough to keep the lights on.